So we're in your American history book and section 2, and we're going into the presidency of George H.W. Bush. We went over his election in 1988. He was the vice president under Ronald Reagan, and from that point, he won an overwhelming victory as the next president of the United States. We went over the election and on into the foreign affairs under George Bush. And now we got to the point of the War of Desert Storm, basically called the Persian Gulf War or Operation Desert Storm. So, and how we won a great victory, this war only lasting 2.5 months. And so what was this war about? We told about Iraq, the country of Iraq here, with their dictator of Saddam Hussein, who basically invaded this little country here of Kuwait. So here we have Saudi Arabia, and here we have Iran on this side, and then here we have the Gulf, as we hear, and Iraq. And so why would they invade this little tiny country? Well, look, they produce 13.3% of the Arab oil in this country. Saudi Arabia being this larger country here, producing almost 25%, and Iraq. Of course, Saddam Hussein would want to take over this small country, and so indeed he did invade, and that's where the war centered. But Saddam Hussein wanted to take over the world. His next victory he thought would be over all the other Arab countries. So he wanted to be the next so-called ruler of the world, or I would say Antichrist of the world, and center his world, his country, his dictatorship, I should say, in Babylon. So he was very crazy. So anyway, we have a great victory in overcoming Iraq, but Saddam Hussein, he goes into shelter somewhere. He flees, and we don't go after him, which was a big mistake for President Bush, because later on he would be back, we know. So anyway, this was what the whole Gulf War was about, the Operation Desert Storm. And we had a couple great generals, Colin Powell and Schwarzkopf, both being involved in this at this time, and great victory. So from that point, we're going to go into the domestic affairs. I kind of went over this already. Basically how important it was whenever there was a vacancy in the Supreme Court. Each party wanted to get their candidate involved, whether the candidate was a liberal or a conservative. So you'll see this every president in appointing Supreme Court justices, how important it was for them and for everyone as they looked on, because this could change the tide. The Supreme Court changes the tide of our whole government and our whole country. So Bush nominated federal judge Clarence Thomas, and there was a great, he had a lot of conservative views, but there was a great debate in the court system. But he did, after much debate, he was confirmed into the Supreme Court. All right, now we're kind of changing over what else is going on during this time. Well, intelligent design. Oh, now we're intelligent design. It was a new movement. The movement right prior to this was what? Evolution. And now we have scientists thinking evolution doesn't work. Even if they at that point hadn't believed in God, they started looking at how complicated things were, especially DNA, and how it just couldn't just evolve into that. There had to be an intelligent designer. So evolutionists had claimed creation is not a science. Creationism is not a science. It is a religion, they said. And they wanted to keep it out of our public education system. They defined evolutionary science as a true science. They said evolution is true without proof. Despite the fact that it could not be tested or even observed, they said evolution is true and creation is not. And that's what they had, basically set up for our public schools. I went through that time, so I know. So evolutionary science is rooted in the false belief of naturalism, the assumption that only the natural world exists and anything spiritual, such as God or creation, can be immediately dismissed as fiction. They said if you're talking about God, if you're talking about religion, if you're talking about the Bible, they just considered it fiction, that they did not want it in science. And so they picked evolution instead, which, and again, evolution would be considered a religion too, because it has never been proven either. And it is fiction. So anyway, many scientists began to notice that their area of scientific study appeared to have design and order. And predictability and extreme complexity in the universe. So saying the universe is so complex, get down to the atom, and the atom has all kinds of little designs and machines, even in the midst of the tiniest building blocks, atoms. How about DNA? How complicated is that? So they were looking like, there's no way that these things could have evolved out of nothing. And so a movement began among scientists called intelligent design. The scientists speak out now on intelligent design. They're speaking out against evolution. The Mystery of Life's Origin. This was a book by Charles B. Thankston, Dr. Roger Olson, and Dr. Walter L. Bradley. So 3 doctors get together, The Mystery of Life's Origin, on it, and they represented intelligent design. They dealt with the impossibility of chemicals mindlessly evolving into primitive life forms, using chemistry, not religion, as its basis. The intelligent design movement grew, adding more scientists and more published works who refuted the idea that nature as observed could develop by random chance. They said, this could not happen by random chance. Just look at the plants, look at how complicated our eye. How can we see? Did that just happen? And onto the universe and onto DNA, all these things. So the scientists are thinking, yes, there has to be an intelligent design, an intelligent designer, God. Then promoting evolution. In spite of the physical evidence opposing a randomized universe, evolutionists found allies in the courts to help them silence these creationists and intelligent design people in the public schools. So they, again, were banning creation science in the schools. In 1987, Edwards versus Aguillard decided that even if evolution and creationism were taught together, teaching creationism would be unconstitutional. So they said, creationism is unconstitutional, so we're not, even if it's correct, we're not going to teach it. Isn't that the way they go? They think, okay, this is what the law says, we don't really know, but we're not going to teach creation in the schools, because it's unconstitutional. Is it really unconstitutional? We'll find that creationism really is the foundation of science, isn't it? So the Supreme Court said to discredit evolution by counterbalancing its teaching at every turn with the teaching of creationism as a religious belief. So the Supreme Court were discrediting evolution by counterbalancing its teaching at every turn with the teaching of creationism as a religious belief. Soon evolution now was being taught as the only legitimate conclusion of science. So they're saying, we don't want these creationism people to get in here, and end up throwing out evolution, do we? So they were saying that now evolution is the only thing we're supposed to teach. Here's a picture of this, like the gorilla here teaching. It's that's a spoof. It's not real, but onto, of course, we have this court decision being a bad one. Teaching of creation science and evolution in public schools now, they would just teach evolution like it was science. So Edwards versus Gilliard became the case. Just know this case, when you look at it right away, has to do with evolution. This case was voted in Gilliard's favor of 7 of the 9 votes. So now they would have to teach evolution as a science, and creationism would be unconstitutional. What a bad ruling. And fighting evolution. So scientists supporting intelligent design began to challenge this practice in 1989. Dr. Philip Johnson, he was a professor of law at Berkeley, concluded in On Darwin on Trial that evolution would not hold up in a court of law. A good thing coming out of Berkeley. A good man, so Darwin on trial. That even the philosophical basis of materialism, evolution, and naturalism was an error, was erroneous. So he said, the teaching here of materialism and naturalism is an error, a big error we have promoted in the public schools. Darwin on trial. I have to say one thing. Darwin, before he died, he actually prayed with a lady, and she believes, Lady Hope was her name back when, and she believes that Darwin, at the end of his life, actually became a Christian and gave his life to Jesus. But nobody really hears that, do they? Because, of course, the evolutionists would never let that get out. Growing national debt. So we're kind of switching over now to another domestic problem at this time, the growing national debt. The success of the Persian Gulf War was quickly forgotten in the face of economic problems as President Bush neared the end of his term. 1989 to 1992, the national debt grew by $1 trillion. See how it's going up from Carter, and it's gone up to Bush. Bush, thinking the fall of the Soviet Union signaled a new world order of American-led peace, he cut the defense budget. But this did not solve the debt and cost many people their jobs. He cut the budget, but it cost their jobs, and it didn't really do much to the national debt. So President Bush went on a campaign promise. This was the big mistake. He told the voters that he would promptly reply to any new tax bill from Congress by saying, "Read my lips, no new taxes." So he kept saying that was his campaign. Read my lips, no new taxes. So what happens then? Read my lips, no new taxes here. The Democratic-controlled Congress refused to send Bush any budget that would fulfill that pledge. So basically they said, well, we're not going to send him anything so he can say that he rejected it or vetoed it. So the president decided to compromise. Oh, not a good idea. Signing a budget that raised the existing taxes and technically then fulfilling his promise to reject the new taxes. So he put forth, had Congress sign one just so that he could say that he rejected it. Not a good idea. That's a little bit manipulating, don't you think? So regardless, few Americans saw it that way, and the broken promise later hurt his chance for re-election. They said, read my lips, lied. Read my lips will not do. He had, basically new taxes, basically saying that when he became president, yes, he would have to have, taxes, they thought. So that's the end of this section. And now we'll go on. We're going to go now into the next presidency, which would be under Clinton, President Clinton.